Hi, everybody. It's Jay, and I am back in the booth with you for another sneak peek video preview for this week's new release here on Say with Jay. Our new release this week is Just a Cowboy's Fairy Tale. It's the 9th book in Jessie Gussman's Flyboys of Sweet Briar Ranch Western Sweet Romance series, and I'll have a bit more about the story and a live preview reading for you in just a bit. But first, as we've been doing with this series, Jessie has been including food in the course of the story, and I've been making that dish for you. Well, we're going to do that again today, here in another segment of Cooking with Jay. Now, today's segment is actually a little bit different, because in the course of this story, Jessie doesn't mention a specific recipe. In fact, she only mentions the food. And as the way the food plays out in the story, I'm not going to make it that way. Because, well, I think you'll understand when I explain. The food in question is that venerable favorite, Brussels sprouts. Yes, now wait a minute. Before you turn off the video and run screaming out of the room, hear me out. Okay, so in the course of the story, the Brussels sprouts are made in such a way that the characters in the scene are actually daring each other to see how many the other can eat. Kind of a food eating contest, but in a scary sort of way. So, clearly, I'm going to give you a way to prep Brussels sprouts that may change your mind how you think about them altogether. First, though, a little bit of history. If you don't like Brussels sprouts, because if you are of a certain age, like, say, your narrator, you might have had Brussels sprouts when you were a kid and remember that they were just bitter and maybe not prepared all that well, and were just gross, and you don't ever want to have them again. Well, if that's the case, you might want to give them another try, and here's why. Back before the 60s and early 70s, Brussels sprouts were harvested by hand. In the late 60s and 70s, they began to be mechanically harvested. Well, to facilitate that mechanical harvesting, the predominant strain of Brussels sprouts that farmers began to grow was very hardy and produced a lot and could handle that mechanical harvesting, but they also were very, very bitter. That bitterness comes from a compound called glucosinates. It's a sulfur-based compound, which should match up in your mind with what you were tasting, but glucosinates are found in plenty of other vegetables, like broccoli and cabbage and kale, and most certainly Brussels sprouts. In the late 90s, some Dutch scientists identified these glucosinates as the reason why some vegetables were bitter. And they began to look at old discarded seeds and varieties of Brussels sprouts that were not high in glucosinates at all. And they began good old-fashioned crossbreeding of mechanically harvestable varieties and these far more tasty low glucosinate varieties, and eventually came up with a strain that was good at both, that was easily mechanically harvestable, but also was far, far less bitter than what you might remember. So, if that's the only reason you haven't tried Brussels sprouts lately, you might want to give them another go. Now that said, you still need a good way to prepare them, which back then may or may not have been around. What I'm going to cook for you today is hot honey garlic Brussels sprouts. Super easy, really quick, only takes a few minutes of prep, and cooks really quickly too, about no more than 20 minutes. So let's get started. Now, before I do, as always, the ingredients will be down in the description of this video. But unlike most of the recipes I've done, the amounts of the ingredients you kind of have to eyeball. It really depends on how big of a batch of Brussels sprouts you're making and how much you like those particular flavors. So feel free to add a little more, add a little less. It's also a very forgiving recipe, very, very hard to mess up. All right, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to wash your Brussels sprouts. Put them in a bowl, fill it with cold water, and give them a good rinse. Don't be afraid to mix them around rather vigorously. If any of the leaves start to fall off, that's fine. In fact, you want any of the leaves that are loose off anyhow. Next, either using some paper towels or a tea towel, whatever you like, go ahead and dry them off really well. And then inspect each one and go ahead, as I said, pull off any leaves that are loose and coming off anyway. Next, you want to cut your Brussels sprouts in half lengthwise. Also, cut off any bottoms that are dried and brown or anything like that, any of the stems, I guess you would call it. And again, if any of the outer leaves fall off, go ahead and let them. Not a problem. Transfer your Brussels sprouts to a bowl and add a bit of avocado oil or other neutral oil to your bowl. Next, you want to add salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and paprika. Get that all mixed really well. Once everything is well mixed, you want to put them in your air fryer or convection oven or in your oven on broil, but put them curved side up in your air fryer or convection oven or oven on broil, 350 degrees at 17 to 20 minutes. About halfway through, mix them up a little bit, stir them up to get both sides cooked. Now, while they're cooking, you want to take about 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup of honey. Put that in a small saucepan. To that honey, you're going to want to add just a small splash of apple cider vinegar. After you add your apple cider vinegar, you want to add between 1 and 3 teaspoons of Aleppo pepper. Aleppo pepper, if you can find it in your grocery store, is great for this kind of thing. It's not nearly as hot as chili peppers or red crushed pepper. It's got a nice full flavor with not nearly as much kick to it. If you can't find Aleppo pepper in your stores, certainly chili peppers or red pepper will do. You may just want to cut back on it a little bit. Finally, to that, you're going to want to add between 1 and 3 teaspoons of minced garlic. Go by personal preference there. I like garlic, so I'm going to add that full tablespoon. Then put this over low heat. Very, very important. Low heat. You don't really want to cook this so much as you want to just help the flavors all infuse and to warm up that honey. Now, once your Brussels sprouts have finished cooking, you want to move them to a bowl and then pour your honey mixture over the top. Give it a good stir, and it is ready to serve. And there you go, folks. Hot honey garlic Brussels sprouts. I promise you, this is not the Brussels sprouts you were used to, and it may just turn you into a raving fan. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Hot honey garlic Brussels sprouts. I hope you'll give them a try, and if you do, let us know how it goes down in the comments. Also, if you have any vegetables that you used to think were gross, but you found a great way to prepare them, let us know about those down in the comments too. We'd love to hear it, And who knows, that might be the subject for a future episode of Cooking with Jay. All right, let's talk a little bit about Just a Cowboy's Fairy Tale. Just a Cowboy's Fairy Tale is the story of Eliza Walton. She is a former Houston journalist who has left the journalism business and has moved to Sweetwater and is living with her Aunt April. Yes, that Aunt April. Now, when Eliza was in high school, she was trapped in a fire at her school, and she was rescued kind of against all odds by a firefighter. And even though she suffered serious burns on the lower half of her body, her rescuer was burned far worse. She has since recovered, but she's learned over the years visiting her aunt in Sweetwater that this firefighter has moved up from Texas and may be living in the Sweetwater area. Now, she has wanted to move to Sweetwater because Aunt April is one of her few remaining relatives, and she's grown to love the town. But she would also love to find this man and thank him for what he did. It's also the story of Hines Cannon, the firefighter who saved her all those years ago. Hines has a ranch where he can live out his days by himself or with as little contact with the outside world as he can. He's recently found himself in a bit of a pickle. He has suffered an accident where he has a broken leg and a broken arm, and honestly, he needs someone to help him, to be, for lack of a better word, a nursemaid while he recovers. When Eliza finds out that Hines does indeed live in the Sweetwater area and that he needs someone to take care of him, she readily agrees to do it. I've got a live reading for you here, and it's the scene where they first meet. She has more or less made herself at home and just walked in his house, kind of telling him she's going to be there to take care of him. The only problem is Hines doesn't want help from her or anybody. And kind of sarcastically, he even accuses her of maybe being a thief who's come to rob him. Anyway, let's join the scene, and I hope you enjoy it, and then you'll come back this Friday for the full release here on Say with Jay. It might not look like much to you, but it's home to me.
If I were a thief, I wouldn't have chosen this place to rob. That's all I was saying. I think it was a compliment.
The woman narrowed her eyes, as though thinking back on her words and trying to make sure she wasn't saying something that wasn't true. I don't think it was.
I'm the one who said the words. I can tell you what the meaning was behind them. You can only guess.
His mouth clamped closed. She was right. That was true about anything. He couldn't discern the thoughts of any man or woman. He didn't usually have someone in front of him telling him that, though. He wasn't going to give up on their argument that easily. And I'm the only one who can tell you how I took them. Her lips quirked up just a little more, and she inclined her head. To his chagrin, he felt his lips trying to imitate hers. He wanted to respond in kind to her humor and good nature. Interesting that she hadn't even seemed to notice the scars on his face and the way it was misaligned. The rest of his body was the same, although all that he could cover was hidden with long sleeves and long pants. His hands were a little scarred, and if he were out in public more, he would probably practice hiding them. As it was, he didn't spend any more time out in public than he had to. In fact, aside from his trip to the auction barn to look at the horse, he hadn't been out since last Christmas, when he'd gone in late to the Christmas Eve service, stood in the back listening to the beautiful music, watching the lights, seeing the heads of the happy people, and listening to the sermon, before slipping out as the closing hymn played. Christmas was when he missed his sister the most.
You're right about that. I apologize if you misunderstood my meaning. I certainly did not mean to give offense.
He wanted to say he took offense anyway, but the woman seemed so friendly and nice that he just couldn't bring himself to be mean or rude. "Forgiven," he said begrudgingly. "That doesn't change the fact that I didn't ask for anyone to come take care of me."
Perhaps the reason that you didn't open the door yourself was because your crutch is sitting across the room from you. Perhaps you can't get out of your chair and walk to it because you have a broken leg and you're not supposed to be on that leg. Perhaps it's going to be hard to walk anyway because your arm is fractured and you can only use one crutch.
"Someone's been telling you about me."
You don't need to be so offended about it. Sweetwater is a small town. People talk, and they care about you. That's why I'm here, because someone cared enough about you to think that you might need some help beyond your housekeeper.
She even knew about Alice. He gritted his teeth. She was right. The town was right. And while it irritated him on a surface level, there was a part of him that felt warm and cared for, noticed the way all humans long to be noticed, cared for that the town would think that he needed someone. "Who's paying you?"
I didn't talk about payment when they asked me to help. They just said there was a need, said someone needed me, so I came.
She was hiding something. She dropped her eyes for just a moment, and he could tell that there was something else she was fighting not to say. "That's not the only reason," he said, not knowing what it could be, but knowing there had to be something else that would have made her come out here.
Really? You wouldn't hear that there was something in need and go help them no matter what? A horse, for example?
She said, her lips working a bit again, like she knew about the horse he'd just rescued. He finally said begrudgingly, "Thank you. I try to make sure they are." His eyes narrowed. "Are you a reporter?" He had inquiries over the years, people who wanted him to do interviews, to talk about the fire and his experience, supposed heroism, and scars. He hadn't wanted the attention, especially with the way he looked. Reporters always wanted pictures to go with their stories. His question made her uncomfortable. She shifted. He figured that would be one reason she would jump at the chance to take care of him. The reason she would do it without pay. "You are," he accused. "You're a reporter. That's why you're here. That's how you know so much about me. You've asked questions, the way a good reporter does." There was no compliment in that last sentence. "That's why no one is paying you to be here. You'll get money from the story when it runs. You can leave." His voice hadn't risen, and there was no anger in it, just a controlled dislike. He'd hated reporters since his accident. They had been persistent, taking pictures as he walked around the hospital in his gown. When they hadn't been able to get anything else to splash on the front page, that was the picture they ran. A little fuzzy circle covering the gaping hole in the back. Irritating, frustrating. It made him angry. Like his pain didn't mean anything except a good story. Of course, they really wanted the story because of his supposed heroism, but he hadn't done anything that anyone else wouldn't have done. Any other firefighter would have done the exact same thing. He didn't deserve credit for doing something that anyone would have done. He just had the opportunity, and he took it. Of course, it meant saving a life.
You are partially right,
she said, her tone a little softer, a little less confident, an apology in it. I thought so. He wanted to show her the door, but he couldn't even get out of his chair.
I used to be a reporter. I do know the questions to ask, but I quit.
The word sounded final, a little sad, like she'd left her job but had quit for a reason that had given her no other choice. I don't believe you, he said, even though that was mostly a lie. He could tell from the tone of her words that she really had quit. Of course, maybe she'd quit because she couldn't make any money at it, and she had decided that the story about him would be just the thing to break her into the business again. He could see that happening.
It's true. I chose to quit. I chose to come to Sweetwater where my aunt lives. I moved in with her, and I was looking for a job. I do love to write. I'm not going to deny that. And I also keep a journal of what I do during the day, my thoughts and feelings about it. Writing is something that's a part of me. I can't just give it up. But I have no intentions of writing a story about you and publishing it.
Why would I believe that? He snarled. The snarl was because he actually did believe it, and he didn't want to. He was irritated with himself for falling under her spell. Or maybe just because she was beautiful, she could manipulate him into doing whatever she wanted. It had been a long time since a beautiful woman had a conversation with him. All his fault, since he didn't go out. He didn't come into contact with any beautiful women.
Because it's the truth.
Her words were simple, accompanied by a little shrug of her shoulders, which made the bag at her side rustle again. She tilted her head, looking at him, somehow her look reminding him that he was still sitting in his chair, his arm and leg both killing him, with very little hope of getting out without a lot of pain.
Please, let me stay. I owe you.
What in the world could she mean by that? Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.